revolved around the shul and the Ladies' Guild, which she began as its first chairman, with some trepidation, so I understand. By the time I joined the Guild in 1964, together with several other young marrieds with small children, the Guild was a fully established, active group of women who, led by Helen, had an enormous influence on us youngsters, as we were then. And as our knowledge of orthodoxy and tradition was somewhat limited due to us being brought up in wartime, it's hard to believe that it's all those years ago. Helen's band of helpers are well worth a mention here. The Kitzbergs, the Millers, Browns and Weisvogels were all part of the fabric of our shul, and their friendship with the Olivestones was rock solid. Much of Helen's life here revolved around Bernard during his active years, with his devotion to the shul and the wider community. And then later on, during his years when his sight and health had let him down, and he needed a lot of support, Helen was his right hand. But we still had Helen around our table at Ladies' Guild meetings. One of my fondest memories was on the occasion of the consecration of the newly built shul. At a reception prior to the service, where anybody who was anybody in the Federation was present, and I was there in my capacity as chairman at the time, I found myself being introduced to several of these eminent gentlemen, but felt a restraining hand at my back. It was Helen, making sure I did not proffer my hand to anybody in greeting. I didn't let her down. Her knowledge, advice, help and encouragement was a vital part of the Guild's continued development. Angela Peston, who has been here helping do the tea, but she's had to go. Angela and myself shared more than 30 years as individual chairman of the Guild, and we always knew Helen was behind us on all levels, but never backward, with sometimes necessary constructive criticism. Leaving Edgware was a very difficult time for Helen. Bernard had wanted to emigrate long before he passed away, but Helen was adamant that her life was here. And whilst her wonderful family dropped everything when they visited them in Israel and America for Yom Tovim, etc., on a day-to-day basis, in Helen's opinion, they could not expect this all the time. A wise woman. I suspect that this was a rare time that Bernard did not get his way. As a result, Helen and Bernard celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary at the Yeshurun. Diane Fisher, an old family friend, was invited to address the young couple on the Shabbat, and a Kiddush was held in their honour. In his address, the Diane pondered about 60 years being considered a diamond wedding anniversary. He could find no reference to this in biblical commentary, but suggested that, quote, Mrs. Olivestone was a diamond for putting up with Mr. Olivestone all those years. So Helen and Bernard stayed in Queen's Close, and it was not until her circumstances changed that she finally had to relent and go and live in Israel on Kibbutz Lavi. Anybody who visited her there would always be closely questioned about the shul and the Guild back in Edgware. Being present at Lavi for Helen's 100th birthday was an event I will never forget. I will conclude by repeating Cedric's quote, which I used in her obituary after she passed away at the great age of 105. You could take Helen out of Edgware, but you could never take Edgware out of Helen. Our Helen, wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, we honour today a remarkable woman. Thank you.
In our family, some Sfarim, some rabbinical works, which were authored by our ancestors a few generations. My son, who writes the foreword, talks about something he learned from his mother about the family. And she said that up to that point, in the family there were 36 rabbis, dor achar dor, generations of rabbis, one after the other. And then she added בטוח בזה, she is absolutely 100% sure שהתורה חוזרת על האכסניה שלה, that the Torah will always find a home where it is welcome in this family. ולא ימושו מפיך ומפי זרעך. And it will never be absent from the hearts and minds and mouths of this family. Well, we may have missed a few generations of rabbis, but in this generation we again have a Rabbi Olivestone, Cedric's son, and on behalf of the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, it's my privilege and honor to call on Harav Yuval Olivestone.
Yesterday in Shul, we read Parashat Bamidbar. Bamidbar is basically a long list of families, ancestors, and descendants. It may even be boring for some of us to listen to this long list of names and families. But the truth is that even though it's only a list, it's a very important list. These are the ancestors who founded our people, our great community called Am Yisrael. It may be a coincidence this date is right after Parashat Bamidbar, but I strongly feel that the same connections that are in Parashat Bamidbar, the connections between generations, the connections that build families and build Am Yisrael, these connections are the real issue of this special afternoon. It was a great privilege being one of Savta's grandchildren. Savta's life gave us all a special perspective, a life full of inspiration. Savta lived through 2 world wars, through very difficult times, but her spirit was always positive and optimistic. She enjoyed living. She enjoyed seeing people and talking to people, having a stroll on the high street. She enjoyed cooking. She always knew exactly what she wanted, and she always was very straightforward, always said what she thought. Every time a grandchild came to her, her eyes lit up. We saw how she was happy. She had her sons and grandchildren and great-grandchildren coming in to see her frequently. No doubt she was happier in Israel than she would have been had she stayed in England. She had a son living right next door. Ellis looked after her, totally devoted and caring for her, coming in to see Savta many times every day and looking after all her needs. Many years ago, I remember, she used to come once or twice to us, to Israel, bringing sweets and chocolates, Mars bars, Milky Ways, chocolates we couldn't find in Israel those days. She always taught us that the small details and the way we looked counted just as much. When I began the army, and she was only 87, she wrote a few letters to me to cheer me up. I loved reading her letters, and this is one of the things she wrote with a special sense of humor. This is February 1997. My dear Yuval, just a few lines to say hello. I hope all is well and that you have now settled in. But what have they done to your hair? The pictures that is sent are good, but I hardly knew it was you. I hope they will let you grow all those curls back again, and soon. I remember visits to Savta's house here in Edgeware. I remember the feeling of the carpeted floors, the special furniture in the living room. Especially I remember the kitchen and the smell and taste of a special food. Potatoes and chicken, gewikeltes, knedlach. I enjoyed seeing her devotion to tefillah every Shabbat morning. She would never miss it. She always wanted to help and do good. I heard so many special things about the wonderful work for the Jewish community in England. Her hospitality to everybody. Even when she was 99, she wanted to help in a hotel on the kibbutz. She was very popular with the young people in Lavi. She was loved by everyone. Friends of mine told me how much they loved seeing Savta walk around the kibbutz with her 2 sticks, enjoying the fresh air and singing songs to herself. 4 years ago, my father and I went to Serbs in Poland, the town where Savta's father was born. The only thing left of the Jewish people in Serbs is a cemetery, which is now a wreck. It was very moving to be in the place where her family came from, while she was still alive and with us. She was so happy we went to see where her grandfather was buried, but unfortunately we couldn't find his grave. On the Shabbat before Savta passed away, we read Parashat Chayei Sarah. In that parasha, both Sarah and Abraham pass away at a ripe old age. About Abraham it says, וימות אברהם בשיבה טובה זקן ושבע ויאסף אל עמיו. And Abraham died at a good old age, an old man and full of years. Good old age, full of years. You can't say that about many people. They live to such an advanced age, with such a clear mind, such a great spirit. 105. We just thought it wouldn't ever end. Savta really passed away healthy. It is exceptional that she lived to such a great age, with a healthy body and a clear mind. The davening says, ומי שמייחדים בתי כנסיות לתפילה, וכל העוסקים בצורכי ציבור באמונה, הקדוש ברוך הוא ישלם שכרם. Those who dedicate synagogues for prayer, and all who are involved faithfully in the needs of the community, may the Holy One, blessed is He, give their reward. Savta was always there for everyone. She didn't have an easy life, but she never thought only about herself. Tzorchei tzibur, the needs of the community, were one of the primary issues. Savta, together with Saba, founded this shul many years ago, and she is really and truly one of the people that dedicated synagogues for prayer. This window in the shul is really a never-ending promise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishalem schara. The Holy One, blessed is He, will give her reward.
Looking after her fell far more on our brother Ellis than anybody else. Ellis, as I said at the Mother's Levaya, Cedric and I are convinced that your reward for the mitzvah of Kibbud Av V'Em will be very great indeed.
Grandparents. Your selfless devotion made a deep impression on her, and she would always say that if she ever merited to accomplish anything in life, it was to a large extent thanks to Mrs. Olivestone. On a personal level too, I have fond recollections from my childhood years of trips to Mr. and Mrs. Olivestone's house in Edgware. The warm welcome and hospitality that always awaited us was something of an inspiration that I will never forget. And of course, we greatly appreciated the fact that you always took the time and trouble to travel and on us with your presence at our simchas. Yeh zichra baruch.
Cedric is the major mover and shaker in everything that happens, not only in his family, but in many, many other circles in the world. Cedric was the major contact with the manufacturer of the window, with the arrangements for the shul, and with everything that happens in our family. So we can't ignore Cedric. We never want to ignore Cedric.
Kind introduction, I appreciate it. We are all here today to commemorate, and I even think to celebrate, the life of Mrs. Olivestone, who was called the First Lady of the Yeshurun for a long time, of Helen, of Savta, of Grandma, and of Mum. And perhaps now, after more than 6 months, with the beginning of some kind of perspective, we are realizing how lucky we were to have this extraordinary woman, and she was an extraordinary woman, as you've heard already, our wonderful mother, with us for so long, until we, her 3 remaining sons, had ourselves reached quite respectable ages. Those of us who were fortunate enough to be at her small 105th birthday party in Kibbutz Lavi last August will never forget when she suddenly made an impromptu speech, wishing everybody there to reach her age and then to pray for more. Sadly for her and for us, there was only to be 3 more months before her life drew peacefully to a close. And what a life it was, spanning very nearly the whole of the 20th century and well into the 21st, through 2 horrific world wars, the London Blitz and the daily fear in the summer of 1940 of a Nazi invasion. She lived through economic depressions and recessions, the post-war years of austerity, and on a personal level, the terrible double tragedy at the beginning of 1995 of losing first her eldest son Monty and then her husband Bernard within 3 weeks of each other, and having to sit shiva under immense strain with us twice within a month, once here in Lavi, and then the second time in Kibbutz Lavi, once here in Edgware, and then the second time in Kibbutz Lavi when she had already reached the age of 87. I personally thought then that she was so emotionally drained and physically exhausted that she could not and would not recover. But she did, and she bounced back then as she did time and time again during the last 18 years of her incredible life, when she lived first alone here in Edgware, in this wonderful Yeshurun community for 12 years, and then in Lavi after making Aliyah to Israel when she was nearly 99. She fell and broke both hips. The first one here at home in Queen's Close when she was only 91, and while on holiday in Israel, the second hip broke when she was nearly 98. By the way, she was then hospitalized for some weeks in Poria Hospital, not far from the kibbutz. For those who are not familiar with Poria Hospital near Tiberias, I can tell you that you must know at least one of 3 languages, Ivrit, Russian or Arabic, in order to be understood by the staff. Mum's mother tongue when she was only a child in Antwerp was Yiddish, the only language she apparently knew when her family came to England in 1914, exactly 100 years ago. Later, of course, she spoke perfect English. You would understand that Yiddish and English are not exactly prime assets then in Poria, but somehow she not only survived, but also became a favourite of the staff. About 5 years ago, she suffered a heart attack and was quickly hospitalised again, returning to La Vie almost as good as new about 4 or 5 days later. She fell a few more times after that and once got up and said, "It's okay, don't worry, I've got nothing left to break anymore." As you will see in the short film we're going to try to show, upstairs in the hall in a few minutes, it was this sense of humour and feistiness that marked her life throughout. This film was adapted especially for her 100th birthday, but it was made mostly in our apartment before she moved to La Vie. And it was made for a series on Israeli television for old Olim. As she said in the film, she always looked on the bright side of life. It was her optimism and an inherent cheerfulness, I'm sure, that kept her going in such good health for so long until her body finally caught up with her age. In her last years in La Vie, she immensely enjoyed visits from her grandchildren and from the great-grandchildren, whom she affectionately called the Greats. And even last October, a few days before she passed away, when she was already drifting in and out of consciousness, her face broke out in a huge smile, her eyes lit up when she recognised one of the greats who came in to see Savta Helen. So many of people have asked her since she passed away, "Nu," they say, "what's the secret? How did she manage to live so long?" Well, in the film she says it was her attitude to life. Accept what you get, she said. Just accept what you get and carry on. That's all there is to it. Actually, I'm not quite sure that's all there was to it. As you all well know today, in the modern world, as a recipe for good health and long life, recommendations are regular exercise and, of course, no smoking and, above all, a healthy diet. From time to time, she used to treat us to a Polish culinary delicacy, quite tasty, something called ungebrannte Suppe, which we always translate as a burnt potato soup. The grandchildren actually came over and they didn't like it too much. But don't get me wrong, as Yuval already said, Mum was a very good cook. It's just that apparently she did not like the colour green. None of us can remember, when we were young, ever seeing a green salad on the table at mealtime. In fact, I was already over 20 years old when someone asked me what salad dressing we used at home. And I hadn't got the foggiest idea what it was. She loved making and eating chopped liver nearly every Shabbat. And her favourite food was gribbenes, which, to explain to those of you who are not familiar with this particular Jewish Eastern European delicacy, is the skin of the chicken fried in schmaltz. She never heard, I think, of low cholesterol or high cholesterol. And if she did, she obviously didn't think they were very important. She never heard of aerobics. She never did any physical exercise, except perhaps for decades, to push her trolley up and down Station Road in Edgware, and she also used to smoke, as did Dad, well into middle age. However, you will see in the film, I hope, how she bends down and touches her toes at the age of 99 after having just recovered from the second hip operation. But a Jewish mother remains a Jewish mother. On my travels around the world for Bank Leumi, I tried to call her often, particularly when she started living alone and when she was looked after so caringly by friends and relatives here in Edgware. The conversations were never that long and invariably started like this. "Hello, Mum, Cedric here, how are you?" "Mum, fine thanks, Cedric, where are you now?" "Cedric, I'm in Frankfurt, Mum, just about to fly to Moscow." "Mum, have you got your coat?" Or, "Hello, Mum, I'm calling from Los Angeles." Mum. Hello, Cedric. What time is it there? Cedric. Just after midnight, Mum. Mum, have you had your supper? It's true. Our father, Bernard Olivestone, was, as many of you well know, and particularly those here today who lived in Edgware at the time, a very well-known and hard-working London Jewish communal worker. Dad also had a great sense of humour, but I'll never forget what he said when making a speech at our wedding back in 1966. Cedric, he said, has a sense of humour, but it needs developing. Not only did he and a few other balei batim establish this shul, and a book could really be written about the trials and tribulations they went through to get this shul established, he was involved in many, many different Jewish organisations in London, such as the Shechita Board, the Federation, the United Synagogue, the Board of Deputies, the JNF, the JIA, or the JPA as it was called then, the Kosher School Meals on Wheels, the London Board of Jewish Religious Education, etc., etc. And he was also a founding governor of the JFS when it was reopened after the war. You remember that, in Camden Town in 1958. He was therefore at committee meetings most weekday evenings, so it was left to Mum to bring up 4 boys, practically by herself, which she did with little complaint. Well, maybe some. But she still found time to establish and chair very successfully for many years, as you've just heard from Brenda, the Synagogue's Lady Guild, and to be involved in various other charitable and voluntary activities. And in her 80s, she will be very proud of the fact that she went to visit the old people in Edgware General Hospital, as it was called then. I think it's now called Edgware Community Hospital. Yeah. Where many of the people she went to see were younger than she was. Edgware for her, as you heard, was the most important place, the centre of her life. And she said many times how much she wished she could return to her kahillah, her community. This was entirely understandable. She lived in Edgware for about 65 years. Our parents moved here to Broadfields Avenue in 1943, when, according to Dad, it was very difficult to get a minyan. This shul, this particular building we are now in, opened by Dad in 1951, and if you go outside you can see the commemoration stone outside there, and now named after him, was a central part of our childhood and remains constantly in our memories. I would like to pause here for a minute, and in addition to what David said, pay a tribute to a remarkable person, to Diane Lopian, the former rabbi of the shul. A wonderful man, a man of great learning with a sparkling personality and a twinkle in his eye, a great posek, which means an interpreter of the law, who sadly passed away just a few short months ago. On a personal level, we'll always feel eternally grateful to him and to Mrs. Lopian, to Judy. We're very pleased to see here with us today, as they showed tremendous hospitality to Mum when she lived alone in Edgware for so many years after our father died. She had an open invitation for Shabbat meals at their house, which luckily was literally around the corner, and she always spoke very fondly of them. In fact, we chose May 25th today for this ceremony, as when I spoke to the Dayan about it some months ago, he asked us to make the ceremony today, if we could, as he intended with Judy to travel to New York for Shavuot, which, as you know, we celebrate next week. The mark of many great men, I think, is surely their modesty. And when I called Mrs. Lopian to invite her here this afternoon, I said to her that after reading the Hespedim and the obituaries of the Dayan, I realized that I had had no idea what a great and important man he was. Judy's reply, you know what she said? I don't think he did either. Mum left Edgware and Yeshurun, as she said, with a good name, and reputation for her was undoubtedly one of the most important things of all. She lived on in Israel for a further 8 years, in the course of which she received 2 birthday cards from Her Majesty, one on her 100th birthday and another one on her 105th birthday. And if she'd had a 106th birthday, she would have got another one. So we all have something we can all look forward to. Even in La Vie, we continue to learn from her, as she demonstrated to us all, family and friends, how to grow old, or in her case, very old, with tremendous and exemplary dignity, and to command respect from all who came into contact with her. Despite not having any real formal Jewish education, remember she was born in 1908, she nevertheless managed to instill into us children, from the time we were very young, a deep love of Yiddishkeit and all things Jewish. And she accepted the halakha as it was, without questioning, and carried out to the best of her ability. Simply, that was what you had to do, that's the way it was, and that was it. She is sorely missed by us all, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, family and friends, and I'm sure by the people of the Yeshurun she will never be forgotten. So for us, her descendants, the 3 magnificent windows behind me dedicated to Dad, to Mum and to Monty, echo a mirror. There are 3 tombstones far away in that sad, small cemetery in Kibbutz Lavi, signifying the 2 things, apart from family of course, that were the most important to our parents in life, and surely in a way to Monty as well. They were firstly the State of Israel, and then this, the Yeshurun Synagogue in Edgware. For our family today, we have closed the circle. Thank you very much for attending. Yehi Zichra Baruch, may her memory be blessed. Yehi Zichram Baruch, may their memory be blessed. Thank you very much.
I want to echo something Frederick said. After my brothers and I all left the country, Mummy was left eventually on her own. And the people in the neighborhood were absolutely terrific, but I have to single out our cousins, Alan and Ruth Weisrose and Roz and Steve Robbins, who took her to the post office and took her to the supermarket and came and fixed things in her house and were absolutely so generous of their time and their encouragement that she really depended on them, and therefore we depended on them. I want to publicly thank all of them. And this